on Team Human, Conscious Intervention in the Machine. This is where we celebrate the quirky nooks and crannies that make being human so much more than an algorithmic process. It's time to recognize the high weirdness of our circumstances and the universal strange characterizing this moment in our shared history. I'm Douglas Rushkoff, and I'm on Team Human. I want to give a true shout out and loving thanks to our sponsor who's changed the very reality of the Team Human landscape, Everyone's Earth. They are actually, you know how hard it is to find a sponsor that you actually believe in, like that you would work for voluntarily? I mean, that's the thing. It's like, this is a show where I would have them on as a guest to say they're on Team Human. And they're not only on Team Human, but now they're making Team Human. So it's just crazy. It's so hard to describe what they do because they do it so end to end, right? So today I'll talk about them. They have created a way of making cotton that doesn't fuck up the environment. All right, it's as simple as that. They took an old thing, which we all do here, right? Basically, an ancient way of making fabric and applied it to fabric today and gone, duh, now we can do it without fucking everything up. So they do that, and they're gonna make all this stuff. I'm most excited for like the diapers, not personally yet, but for like babies, so we don't have, a planet that Martians find that's just stacks of diapers, and they'll think when they come that we like worship baby poop or something because we created permanent, permanent wrappings around them. So even though the rest of our civilization had gotten, destroyed by gray nano, we saved our baby poops. They must have thought we really loved them, right? So no, it'll melt with the poop, right? You chuck it and it goes, which is cool. But anyway, we love them and thank them for doing this show. Okay, everyone's freaking out. My inboxes, all of them, are overflowing with friends and readers and strangers asking what I think about the elimination of DEI, DOGE's cutting of government budgets and elimination of agencies, the firing of military leaders and their replacement with loyalists, the firing of anyone in government charged with investigating corruption, firing health department employees and then realizing they need to be rehired to fight bird flu and then not being able to find the records of who they even are. And then there are the more troubling social implications of all this. The way that citizens are being incentivized to call out any examples of fraud or waste in government spending, which is the first of what feels sure to be many efforts by government to reward people for ratting out on their neighbors on suspicion that they've done something against the Musk-Trump agenda. And that's going to be good, old-fashioned Stasi fun. And the most freaked out of all are the people who are already envisioning death camps or Guantanamo in their futures for having maybe liked a defiant YouTube video, donated to a particular candidate, or published a Marxist diatribe on Medium. So, yes, the government's shift to technocratic feudalism has been swift, at least in spirit. Lots of disruption, thousands of people fired, thousands of immigrants detained by ICE, millions of people around the world denied humanitarian or other aid and services. Former European allies freaked out that the United States is no longer a state even nominally friendly to their interests or security, and so on. So I get it. If you're watching the stories unfold, it's scary. But even more than scary, it's weird. I mean, strange. Because at least so far, none of this has been effective in the ways such steps are being advertised. Fewer immigrants are being rounded up and detained under the draconian measures now than were imprisoned and deported on a daily basis by the Biden administration. For all the AI and technology being deployed in government systems, Doge couldn't even find the names of the people it fired from the FDA who it wanted to hire back to handle the avian flu. The way it's trying to save money is by firing people from agencies who actually make money. Firing thousands of IRS workers actually loses the government tax money per worker canned and opens the door to more of that corruption that Doge is supposedly here to combat. And that's because, as many of you have noticed by now, the purpose of Doge isn't really to save the government money. In order to compensate for the $2 trillion of tax cuts for millionaire, billionaire investors and financiers, Doge is supposed to cut $2 trillion in spending. And even if we accepted their bogus numbers, they first said they saved $55 billion, but then corrected it to $16 billion, but it's actually, according to NPR, closer to $2 billion, it comes to barely a rounding error in a $2 trillion effort. And once the repercussions of those supposed cuts come through as more forest fires with fewer firefighters, yes, they fired them right after the last round of fires, but before fire season, which starts momentarily, less preventative medicine, more unchecked epidemics in Africa, lower wages, higher unemployment. Try getting a job when there's 1,000 former government workers competing with you for the same gig. Less passable borders, administrative hangups throughout government, and more. And don't even get me started on inflation from higher tariffs, international distrust, and more. To some of your immediate concerns, no. I don't think most listeners of this podcast are in any danger of getting thrown into a gulag anytime soon. The people in immediate trouble right now are immigrants, undocumented aliens, and those actively targeted as other. And they've been in and out of this trouble before and have been in a state of precarity that most of us wouldn't be able to tolerate. My DACA students at Queens, they're not panicked. This is a way of life. The people I am hearing from who are panicked are professors like me. Maybe they don't have tenure yet, and some lefty-sounding journal article they wrote can too easily be identified by right-wing activists or even just a colleague with a grudge and tweeted to the right journalist who makes it just too difficult for a provost to approve their tenure application. Or others looking back at prior industrial fascist states and fearing concentration camps and some other extreme forms of detainment or punishment. Again, though, if you're a black man in America, you already have a 1 in 3 chance of serving time in prison at some point in your life, according to the NAACP. Have you been in a modern American prison? So no, the wave of awful, if it's going to come, is the wave of unemployment, inflation, pandemics, unmanaged natural disasters, and all that other stuff government tries to handle. If anything's coming after you, it's a bot or AI on social media that will use predictive algorithms to determine whether you're going to create unrest of some sort, and then ping the bots at the IRS to slam you with a few audits. It's not for the money, but to take up your time. Death by 1,000 audits. It's way more Kafka than Hitler, and way more difficult for the very same people who've been marginalized by neoliberalism all along, as well as those soon to be impoverished by the collapse of government programs. The thing is, those who've been paying attention must realize that even the $50 or $100 billion of short-term on-paper cuts to budgets of federal departments don't constitute a full percentage point of what would need to be cut if any of this had to do with government savings. That's because it probably doesn't. Elon Musk's chainsaw is less about cutting money than, as the metaphor suggests, pruning the tree of unwanted branches. The objective is not to save money, but to purge those in civil service who would stand in the way of extra-constitutional activities. It's a way of getting rid of the personnel, the humans, who might object to what the government is doing. It starts with humans who may still harbor some allegiance to the diversity hiring requirements imposed by the last Trump administration, but following the last Trump administration's orders is a fireable offense in this one. But I digress. In short, yes, I agree. Everything is weird and fucked and upside down. Things are feeling not just wrong, but weird. We're becoming estranged from the reality in which we live. And not just those of us who may have more progressive Bernie values, but those who have what could be considered conservative or red state values. In my, albeit limited experience, those values are largely the same anyway. Let people do what they want to in the privacy of their own homes and leave me the fuck alone. We want to be able to earn a living wage, create value, move about safely, and not live in a state of perpetual extraction by billionaires from above. That's the great shame in the left's rejection of Bernie Sanders, largely because he agreed to appear on Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan was actually a supporter and could have brought all those angry boys into the tent. But instead of welcoming and engaging with those bros on common ground, the left sent them off to QAnon and worse. But we have a lot in common all the same. We all know that there's a layer of financialization sucking the majority of value out of everything we do. The bank, the landlord, the shareholders, the private equity firms who seize the majority of money from the work that we do. We may have different names for that abstracted entity, but we suffer under it all the same. And we recognized the way it's being administrated and enforced by technology. Maybe buying a Dogecoin gives us some ground floor participation in Musk's billions, right? But how has that really worked out? These bizarre and ineffective interventions, firings, replacements, and institutional collapses will not go over well in Peoria. No, people are simply not afraid enough of transgender athletes to justify this level of societal breakdown and paranoia. I've spent time with the farmers of South Dakota, and they're not mean people. They are environmentalists, and they know more about no-till agriculture, reducing chemical inputs, liberating from the AIs in their John Deere tractors, competing with big agri-conglomerates, and breaking themselves out of the downward spiral of GMOs and Roundup from Monsanto. They're just as smart as we are and equally capable of evaluating what's coming down to them under the guise of deregulation. Maybe our most important job now is to have faith that the rest of humanity, the apparently other side, is seeing the same horror show that we are. We have the most important thing in common, a disgust for people's inhumanity to other people. We just see it in different places and interpret events differently. But right now, even before most of us feel the impact of all this tomfoolery, we all know that what's happening is weird. This doesn't feel right to anyone. It's strange. It's strange. It's strange.
Did you know laundry dryer sheets are actually plastic, and the first ingredient is crude oil? It's in your clothes, on your skin, and piling up in landfills. That's why we invented Cobi, spelled C-O-B-I. C-O for cotton and B-I for biodegradable. The first all-cotton, 100% biodegradable dryer sheet that works better than those toxic alternatives. No chemicals, no plastic. Just soft, static-free clothes that are safe for your family and the planet. Save 10% on your first order at CobiDryerSheets.com. That's CobiDryerSheets.com.
This is weird in the way that ethnobotanist and philosopher Terence McKenna predicted. The rate of novelty, of strangeness, has increased exponentially. We are becoming estranged from the world in which we live, and this not rightness is palpable by everyone. Even those who were hoping for positive change through the dismantling of the administrative state don't like so much change all at once. Even the change is changing. No, I'm sure you can feel it. Not just the Trump-Musk weirdness, but the weirdness all around. Something is up, and I know my fellow humans are feeling the juju, the synchronicities. This concrescence of novelty and almost forced perspective on history, like looking down an infinite spiral staircase and then up. Where are we really? What moment of the story is this? I keep hearing on TV how quickly the Nazis took over once they were in power, how Trump is following the playbook of Hungary's Viktor Orbán, and how these descents into right-wing control tend to last a few decades. But this doesn't feel so much like the beginning of something than the end, a concrescence, the peak of a bad trip, popping the global zit off Gaia's face. What if the 40-year cycle of right-wing ideological rule is what we've actually been living through? It started with the election of Ronald Reagan, the original movie star president, promising to literally make America great again. That was his slogan in his 1980 campaign against Jimmy Carter, the last gasp of the hippie left, who pardoned draft dodgers and hung out with Bob Dylan at the governor's mansion, and who had pot-smoking Willie Nelson over to the solar-powered White House. Reagan was the beginning of a neoliberal pro-corporate swing that included not only George Bush, but the Democrats. Bill Clinton was no George McGovern, but a welfare reformer and a proponent of global markets, not to mention womanizer and intern fondler. The WTO protests of Seattle were during his presidency. Barack Obama jokingly but readily admitted that his policies were close to those of Ronald Reagan. And he proved it by calling on Goldman Sachs to fix the mortgage and banking crisis of 2008. Biden was actually the closest thing to a reprieve from neoliberalism, but that's only because the country was nearly collapsed from the COVID pandemic and needed some old-fashioned government intervention to jumpstart the economy and keep people, alive. Now, we're back to the trajectory we were on. And it's peaking in the most obvious way it could, with the richest corporatist in America, Putin is actually richer than Musk, running the country. So what if the Musk-Trump anti-administration is actually the peak of that neoliberal phase, the exponential limit, rather than the beginning of something worse? What if they create such a cascade of weirdness that the seemingly tepid liberal response to this authoritarian drag show actually pales in comparison to the imminent revolt by red state America against a digital pyramid scheme they know will not include them? It's plain to anyone watching that the new order imposed by the tech elite does not value or even include human beings. Just as farmers don't want to be replaced by AI tractors, human beings want to have roles and lives even after their presence is no longer required to provide billionaires with the services they need to maintain insulation from the earth they have poisoned and left for dead. I keep finding out about AI panels online with titles like, "What are humans for?" Really? That sounds like the kind of question that you ask at the end of a 40-year cycle, not one you ask at the beginning. We can even think of it as a bigger cycle than the past 40 years, let's take the past 400 years, since the establishment of the chartered monopolies that turned craftspeople into wage laborers, indigenous lands into colonial territories, and redefined our social reality as a marketplace. 400 years. Does that ring any bells? Well, maybe not for most of us folks, but for our brothers and sisters in the Bible Belt, the ones our national media would convince us are our adversaries, they will recognize that 400-year cycle as the length of time the Hebrews spent as slaves in Egypt. What in Hebrew, Egypt was Mitzrayim. It translates as the narrow place, not just for its geographical location along the Nile, but the narrow state of mind that a society based on pyramids induces. That whole project, that 400 years of slavery, was the unintentional consequence of the invention of debt. In the mythical story, it's Joseph who tells the Pharaoh to save grain during the 7 abundant years he dreamed about, so that people will have to borrow it in the 7 lean years to follow. And when the people can't pay with money, they'll become indentured servants, slaves. 400 years of that later, it reaches a peak with genocide. And that's the moment when God itself enters the story and all that weird shit starts to happen. That's plagues like we're going through today. Only in Bible lore, each of those plagues is actually the desecration of a false god. Blood desecrates Hapi, the god of the Nile. Death of the cattle desecrates the calf-headed god Hathor. And locusts desecrate the sky god Seth, and so on. What plagues will desecrate our false gods? Will they crash modern idols like the Dow Jones, money, the nation state? I promise, Bible readers will make sense of all this just as fast as Marxists. I think what we've got to do right now, in addition to making noise and caring for those dispossessed by the current changes, is recognize the weirdness, the strange. Breathe it in, metabolize it, and come to see it as the last gasp of a 400-year reign of terror executed in our name, but in no one's best interests. It's not a matter of us and them. It's really about an us and an it. Like a corporation, this program, the abstracted, magical sigil of oppression has been masquerading as a living being. But just as a corporation is not a person, no matter the rights of personhood they've been granted, neither are the AIs that today's pharaohs hope will control and eventually replace us. We must denaturalize all this activity. It's okay to feel weird about it. It's not us that's strange. It's all this shit. And estrangement is the first step toward achieving some agency over the situation. It's the same 4 steps I've been talking about for the past year or so. First is denaturalize power. That just means learning to see things as strange, as social constructions, like when you stare at a dollar bill for a long time and realize, this is just a piece of paper, right? Once you've done that, you realize there's lots of other different kinds of monies we could be using with many different traits. Money that doesn't create debt, but generates prosperity. You gain the agency to do things differently. And then third comes reclaiming our social reality. We may have agency, but we can only accomplish things together. And that group dynamic creates the 4th and last step, cultivating awe. The divine state of which we're all capable when we see ourselves as part of something greater than ourselves. This really can work out okay. We can make it through this thing together. There's a reason so many of our friends got red-pilled. And those reasons come from the same original source, the same primary force of subjugation and dehumanization. They just fell for a different origin story, Marvel instead of DC. Well, it's time for the greatest crossover plot in the history of Western civilization. And I think the way we'll get there is our mutual recognition of the weirdness, the strangeness, the inventedness of the reality show in which we've all been cast, and our mutual unwillingness to play along. Thanks for being on Team Human. Team Human is produced by Joshua Chapdelaine and shot, engineered, and edited by the fine folks at MCM Creative, our new home. The ones I know to thank so far are Jack, Brendan, Gabe, Gab, Aubrey, and Mike. Oh, and who did I just learn? What was the name I just learned today? Marley. Oh, and James and Marley. They all have last names, beautiful last names from their parents, and we're going to learn those soon. Also, great thanks and love to Everyone's Earth, maker of the Kobe dryer sheets, which you chuck in the dryer and they don't destroy the planet. They go away. They disappear. And don't leave microplastics and all that, and don't put poisons on you. I mean, your clothes are already poisoned, but they don't add poison to your clothes. So thanks Everyone's Earth and Kobe dryer sheets. If you use dryer sheets, I don't, but I'm gonna start now. Get Kobe. Please consider supporting the show in its new incarnation as a weekly, meticulously produced video and audio show. And you'll get an ad-free feed, access to our members-only Discord, invitation to Team Human live events, and most of all, the satisfaction of knowing you make this possible. For that, I'm forever grateful. I'm Douglas Rushkoff, and you've been on Team Human, our last best hope for peeps.